I've just heard that when we have that referendum and when we have the vote, it's actually going to be taking place here in Manchester. So you will all be back on that night to hear the result and to celebrate, I hope. Can I just say, as I was coming up on the train from London today, this afternoon, I was thinking, isn't it great to get away from Westminster? Isn't it great to get away from all the tittle-tattle, all the kind of briefings, all the things that go on all the time between politicians and between people who are fighting on either side of this campaign? Isn't it great to be here with people, all of you, who really care about one thing and one thing that unites us all, and that is for us to get out of the most undemocratic, anti-democratic institution there is, the European Union. And I want to remind you all that no one in this country has ever voted to join what is now the European Union. We were taken in by Ted Heath. We were taken in by Ted Heath. But we were taken in by Ted Heath, and then 2 years later we had a vote to stay in. And of course it's a very different organisation from what we voted for, the EEC. But you know, I look back and I'm so proud that some of the figures, the big stalwart figures of the Labour movement, were on the side of not being in that common market. People like Hugh Gateskill, people like Barbara Castle, people like Michael Foot, people like Peter Shore, and of course, Tony Benn. And you know, when I hear and look at some of the things that they have said, and particularly Tony Benn, I am genuinely very, very proud that I'm one of a small number of members of Parliament in the Labour Party, but of thousands and thousands of Labour Party members and Labour supporters, more importantly, across the country who are now speaking out, and we know that those people, if they were still here today, would be on this platform with us. And I just want to... This week we had a debate in Parliament led by John Barron on sovereignty. And it was trying to establish that the Prime Minister, at the very least, should have been trying to get sovereignty and the right of our Parliament to make our laws on the agenda in this so-called negotiations. And we didn't have very long to speak. And I have to say, you know, it was very, very disappointing to me as a Labour MP to see myself and Kelvin Hopkins, and apart from our shadow front bench, the only two Labour MPs, not only who spoke, but who were actually in the chamber to discuss such an important issue as the importance of our Parliament and the right of our Parliament to make the laws of this country. And when I spoke, it was a very short time, and I wanted to just draw the attention to the House, and I'm going to just say a few of these here now, of things that were said, and it just showed that those people in the Labour movement all that time ago, back in 1974-75, were absolutely right when they warned what we were doing when we joined the common market. And one of the things that Tony Benn wrote to his Bristol constituents, he actually wrote a letter to all his constituents back in 1974, when he said, Britain's continuing membership of the community would mean the end of Britain as a completely self-governing nation and the end of our democratically elected Parliament as the supreme law-making body in the United Kingdom. What foresight he showed then in that speech. And later he tells in his diaries of the debate that went on in the Labour cabinet with Harold Wilson when it came up to the referendum. And he said to the cabinet then, and on the 13th of March, he said to the cabinet that he felt Britain will be governed by a European coalition government that we cannot change dedicated to a capitalist or market economy theology. Well, that has been proved. The end of social Europe has long gone with what we've seen happen to the people of Greece. Because the common market will break up the United Kingdom, because there will be no valid argument against an independent Scotland with its own minister and commissioner enjoying common market membership. We shall be choosing between the unity of the UK and the unity of the EEC. And then finally he said, but I was brought up to believe, and I still believe, that when people vote in an election, they must be entitled to know that the party for which they vote, if it has a majority, will be able to enact laws under which they will be governed. And that is no longer true. Any party elected today, whether it's Conservative or Labour, can no longer say to the electorate, vote for me, and if I have a majority, I shall pass that law. Because if that law is contrary to common market law, British judges will apply community law. And that was in the 13th of March 1989, just 3 months before I got elected, so I didn't have the privilege of actually hearing it. But you know, when we look back and see what Tony Benn said then, hasn't it been proved true? And it does really go to the heart of the whole issue. Here we are, as already been said, the 5th most important economic country in the world, the 4th biggest military budget, members of the G7, members of the G20, members of the UN Security Council with a veto, English spoken all over the world, brilliant universities, even saying it in Manchester, brilliant football teams. We have the most wonderful country, and we should be so proud of it. And of course, what we are seeing is those who want to stay in this undemocratic, anti-democratic institution are trying to put our country down. They're trying to say that we would be isolated. We would be isolated when little Iceland, tiny little country, can be members of the WTO, can be on a lot of bodies that are actually making laws and can actually choose to get back its fisheries policy. Why was David Cameron not asking to get back our fisheries policy, to get back our fisheries? We are not going to allow the establishment, the leaderships of all the political parties, or most, not all the political parties, because of course UKIP is united, the leadership of the Labour Party and the leadership of the Conservative parties and the establishment generally are going to try and belittle us. They're going to try and scare us. They're going to try and tell us that we're a weak country and that we're so dependent on the European Union. But we people here, we recognise that our future is not as little Europeanists. Our future is looking to the wider world. And we want to get back that relationship with those Commonwealth countries that we so sadly betrayed during the time of the European Union. And of course, the EU is a shrinking market. It's not doing as well as they would try to make us believe. When we joined, the 9 members that we were then had 36% of the world's economy in business. Today, it is 17% and falling with 28 countries. It's a shrinking market, and it's shrinking literally as we speak. So we have no fear. And that is what the Remain campaign will be telling us all the time. We've heard of some of the things they've said in that ridiculous leaflet that's gone round, funded by some of the banks that actually brought this country nearly to its knees. And I thought that was a brilliant speech by John, who outlined just so clearly why those people in the trade union movement who, for very good reasons at the time, felt that they had to go along with the European Union because it was the only way they were going to get trade union rights and rights at work. We have seen the end of a social Europe. We have seen the end of collective bargaining in Greece. We have seen the end of many of those hard-won battles to give rights. And we cannot any longer, within the trade union movement or in the labour movement, depend on the European Union to keep those rights. So I say to you tonight, you all have a huge, huge responsibility. The truth is that millions of people across this country are really angry about the European Union. They're concerned about it too. They're concerned about the way that it has taken our rights from us and our right as to be independent. I believe that rather being belittled and sidelined is what the establishment will want to paint us, we should be proud that Euroscepticism is now in the mainstream. It's not a marginal issue anymore. It never was, but it was presented as that. It's not a marginal issue. It's in the mainstream. And the broad view of the British public, I believe, is that we must get out. This, as everyone has said, is far bigger than any political party issue, far bigger than any little dispute between some people who want to advance their own career, perhaps, rather than actually be about what this issue is. So you, in this movement, and I call it a grassroots movement, this is not just an organisation. This is going to grow and be a movement right across the country. In meetings like this, on street corners, in shop centres, every single one of you can do your bit. Don't just go home today and say, that was quite a good meeting, and oh, I didn't like that speaker and I liked that speaker. Go home and think what you can do individually, because everybody can make this happen. And the best thing about this referendum is that members of Parliament have only one vote. Members of Parliament have only one vote, and the public has the real vote at the end of it. And I trust the instinct and the common sense of the British people. Thank you.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.